the Halloween box. For the sake of my sanity, let's call me Kevin. This story is about the biggest mistake I ever made. A mistake that started on Halloween night and ended with something far worse than I could have ever imagined. It was Halloween, and I was bored out of my mind. My friends had all gone to a party, but I wasn't in the mood for that. Instead, I found myself scrolling through the internet, looking for something to kill time. I've always been into creepy stuff, urban legends, horror movies, that kind of thing. So I decided to see what I could find on the deep web. I'd heard all the warnings about it, but curiosity got the best of me. I figured it was just another corner of the internet, nothing to really worry about. I spent hours browsing random forums and websites, most of them just as dull and disappointing as the surface web. But then, I stumbled onto a site that caught my attention. It was called the Halloween Box, and it looked like some kind of online auction. The site was basic, almost retro, with a simple black background and orange text, like someone had thrown it together in the early 2000s and never updated it. The description at the top of the page read, "Bid at your own risk. The Halloween box is not for the faint of heart. Once purchased, it cannot be returned or exchanged. You have been warned." Most of the items up for bid were typical Halloween junk costumes, decorations, some old horror VHS tapes, but there was one item that stood out: a plain, unmarked wooden box. The bidding was set to start at $10, which seemed crazy low compared to the other items that were going for hundreds. I don't know what possessed me, but I decided to place a bid. I figured it was just some kind of prank, maybe a fake haunted box or something. I didn't think I'd actually win, but I did. The next day, I got an email confirming that I had won the auction. It gave me a P.O. box to send my payment to cash only, no checks or cards. That should have been my first red flag, but I was too intrigued to back out. I sent the money and waited. About a week later, the box arrived at my doorstep, packed in a plain brown package with no return address. The box itself was nothing special, just an old wooden box, maybe a foot long and half as wide. It looked handmade, with rough edges and no markings at all. It was heavier than I expected though, and when I shook it, I could hear something rattling inside. I'll be honest, I hesitated before opening it. There was something about the box that made me uneasy, like it was holding a secret I wasn't supposed to uncover. But curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed a knife and pried it open. Inside, there was a single item, a small, antique-looking key tied to a faded piece of parchment. The parchment had something written on it in spidery, old-fashioned handwriting. "Unlock the truth. Beware the consequence." I turned the key over in my hands, trying to figure out what it might unlock, but there was nothing else in the box, just that key and the warning. I was disappointed at first, thinking it was just some kind of elaborate joke. But then things started to happen. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being watched, like something was lurking in the shadows of my room. I kept hearing strange noises, soft whispers, the creak of floorboards, and once, the unmistakable sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. But when I turned on the light, the room was empty. The next day, I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows that didn't belong, fleeting glimpses of movement just beyond my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I started finding things out of place. Objects moved, doors left open that I was sure I had closed. I tried to ignore it, but the unease only grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the key had unlocked something I couldn't see, something that was now following me. I decided to do some research, trying to find any information about the Halloween box or the key, but there was nothing. The website had disappeared, and no matter how deep I searched, I couldn't find a single mention of it. That's when the dream started. Every night, I dreamed of a dark, endless corridor lined with doors. In the dream, I'm holding the key, and I know I have to unlock one of the doors, but I don't know which one. I walk down the corridor, trying the key in every door I pass, but none of them open. The longer I walk, the more I feel like something is chasing me, something I can't see but can sense, a presence that grows closer with every step. The worst part is, the dream feels real. Too real. I wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, convinced that whatever was in the dream is still there, watching me from the shadows. And each time I wake up, I find the key somewhere near me, on my nightstand, on the floor, once even tucked under my pillow, even though I'm sure I locked it away before going to bed. It's been weeks now, and I can barely sleep. The dreams are getting worse, the presence more palpable, like it's closing in on me. And the key, I can't get rid of it. I've tried everything, burning it, burying it, even throwing it in the river, but it always comes back, appearing in my house as if it never left. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm terrified of what will happen if I don't figure out what the key unlocks. But I'm even more terrified of what will happen if I do. Whatever I unleashed when I opened that box, it's not going to stop until it gets what it wants. And I'm starting to think that what it wants is me. So if you ever come across something on the deep web that seems too good or too strange to be true, do yourself a favor and leave it alone. Because some doors aren't meant to be unlocked, and some secrets should stay buried.
Lost on Halloween. It's been 12 years, but that night still plays in my mind like it happened yesterday. I don't want to share my real name because I don't deserve anyone's sympathy. What I did or didn't do can never be forgiven. I was 17, and like any typical teenager, I was more interested in my own plans than in what my family needed from me. My parents had asked me to take my little brother, let's call him Danny, trick-or-treating. He was just 6 years old, full of excitement, and couldn't wait to show off his superhero costume. He'd been counting down the days, practicing his lines, and even sleeping with that silly mask on because he didn't want to take it off. But I wasn't thinking about Danny that night. All I cared about was meeting up with my girlfriend and our friends for a Halloween party. I remember Danny tugging at my sleeve, his big eyes full of hope. "Are we going now?" he asked, clutching his candy bucket in one hand and holding on to my jacket with the other. I brushed him off, telling him we'd go soon, but in truth, I didn't plan on taking him anywhere. I figured he'd be fine tagging along with me and my friends. How hard could it be to watch a 6-year-old while hanging out at a party? We reached my friend's place, and the music was blaring, lights flashing. Everything was perfect for a wild night. I told Danny to stay close, but the minute I saw my girlfriend, I forgot all about him. The party sucked me in, laughing, drinking, dancing. I barely noticed when Danny tugged at my sleeve again, trying to tell me something. I brushed him off, irritated that he was ruining my fun. I don't even remember what he said. At some point, I realized I hadn't seen Danny in a while. Panic started to creep in, but I pushed it aside, telling myself he was probably just playing in one of the other rooms or maybe outside with some other kids. I searched the house, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. The party was so loud, so chaotic, that I could barely hear myself think, let alone find a small child. As the hours passed, the reality began to sink in. Danny was gone. We called the police, but by then, it was midnight, and the streets were deserted. No one had seen him. No one had heard anything. He had just vanished, like a shadow swallowed by the darkness. But what I haven't told anyone, not even the police, is that I did see something that night. It happened so fast and I was so terrified that I've tried to convince myself it wasn't real. But deep down I know it was. I saw them take Danny. I was standing in the backyard calling out his name when I noticed movement near the edge of the woods behind the house. It was dark and the trees cast long, menacing shadows. But I could see a figure, no, 2 figures, dragging something between them. My heart stopped when I realized it was Danny. He wasn't struggling, wasn't making a sound. He just hung limp in their arms, like a lifeless doll. I wanted to scream, to run after them, but I was frozen. It was like my body wouldn't obey my mind. I just stood there watching as they disappeared into the trees, taking Danny with them. And then they were gone, swallowed up by the darkness, just like that. It felt like hours before I could move again, but by the time I forced myself to run to the woods, there was no trace of them, no footprints, no sounds, nothing. It was like they had never been there at all. I told the police I didn't see anything. I was too ashamed, too terrified to admit that I'd watched my brother being taken and done nothing to stop it. They searched the woods, but of course, they didn't find anything. How could they? Whoever or whatever took Danny didn't leave a trace. Years have passed, and the search for Danny became cold. My parents never gave up, but I knew the truth. It was my fault. I lost my brother that night, all because I was too selfish to care for him the way I should have. I still have nightmares, dreams where I see him standing at the edge of the woods calling for me. But no matter how fast I run, I can never reach him. I wake up in a cold sweat, his voice echoing in my ears, that same helpless tug on my sleeve replaying over and over. So if you're reading this, please, don't make the same mistake I did. Don't let your selfishness cost you something you can never get back. Because no matter how hard you try to forget, no matter how much time passes, the guilt never goes away.
The Hell Cornfield. I'd like to say that we stumbled into this nightmare by accident, but that would be a lie. We were invited. It was a Friday evening, and it all started with an email. An anonymous message sent to all 5 of us. Me, Clara, Marcus, Ben, and Olivia. No subject line, just a simple link. We should have known better than to click it, but curiosity got the best of us. The email promised an exclusive Halloween corn maze event, one that no one else knew about. A challenge of fear, it said, where only the bravest would make it out. Do you dare? The final line read. Of course we dared. The location was in the middle of nowhere. An old farm just outside the city, far enough that cell service was spotty at best. We arrived around dusk, the sun already sinking below the horizon, casting long shadows over the endless rows of corn. There were no other cars, no signs of life except for an old wooden sign that read, "The Maze." That should have been our first warning. There were no signs, no staff, just the entrance to the cornfield, drawing us in. Clara, always fearless, smirked. What's the worst that could happen? And led us inside. Right away, the maze felt off, with paths twisting endlessly. As night fell, the towering corn blocked out the sky. At first, we laughed, joked, and shoved each other into the stalks. But after an hour, the fun vanished. That's when the horrors began. It started with Ben. He was walking a little ahead of us when suddenly he stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't say anything, just stared straight ahead. I thought he was playing some kind of prank, but when I called his name, he didn't respond. He stood there, frozen, like something had paralyzed him. Then, out of nowhere, he screamed. I've never heard a sound like that come out of someone before. It wasn't fear. It was pure animalistic terror. He turned and bolted back into the corn, disappearing before we could stop him. We ran after him, shouting his name, but the stalks closed in around us like a cage, the maze twisting in ways it shouldn't have been able to. We never saw Ben again. After that, everything changed. The air in the maze became thick, like breathing through a wet cloth, and strange noises started coming from the corn. Rustling that wasn't the wind, whispers that seemed to echo from all directions. Shadows darted between the rows, too fast to be anything human, but too large to be animals. The deeper we went, the more we realized something was terribly wrong. One by one, we started seeing things. Things that couldn't be real. Clara was next. She swore she saw a figure standing in the distance, a man with no face, just standing there, watching us. She panicked, ran toward it thinking it was a way out. By the time we caught up to her, she was gone too. Then came Marcus. His was the worst. He was standing beside me when he started mumbling, talking about something crawling inside his skin. He began clawing at his arms, tearing at his flesh until blood poured down, staining the corn. We tried to stop him, but whatever he was seeing, it was too much. He ran into the darkness, screaming that they were inside him, trying to pull them out. We never found him either. By now, it was just me and Olivia, and we were barely holding it together. The whispers were louder and the shadows seemed closer, watching us, mocking us. We stumbled through the maze, desperately searching for an exit, but every turn led us deeper, the paths shifting in impossible ways. That's when we saw it. The exit. A single light in the distance, glowing faintly at the edge of the maze. We ran for it, hearts pounding in our chests. But as we got closer, we realized something was wrong. The light wasn't an exit at all. It was a doorway, a glowing red entrance into something far darker. Hell. We froze, staring at it. Behind us, the whispers grew louder, the shadows creeping closer. We didn't have a choice. Either face whatever horrors waited in the maze or step into the unknown. Olivia made the choice for us. "I'll stay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Go, someone has to get out." I tried to argue, but she shook her head. "There's no other way. It wants a sacrifice." And with that, she turned and ran into the darkness, leaving me standing at the edge of the doorway. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and fell into the light. I don't know how I made it out, or why it let me go, but I'll never forget the last thing I heard before I blacked out. The sound of Olivia screaming, echoing through the maze, followed by a sickening silence. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed. The police said they found me unconscious on the side of the road, miles from the cornfield. They never found the others. They didn't believe my story, said the maze didn't exist. But I know the truth. And I know it's still out there, waiting for the next group of fools to accept its invitation.
The neighbor next door. What I am going to tell you will make you think that I deserved it, or that it's somehow because of who I am. But trust me, I wouldn't wish this on anyone. I will omit my name for legal reasons, but it's time for me to talk about the horrors I lived through. It began so innocently. My neighbor, Greg, seemed like a normal guy when he moved in next door. Tall, muscular, always out for a jog or working out in his garage. We exchanged pleasantries, small talk here and there. You wouldn't think twice about someone like him. He invited me over a few times to hang out, maybe work out together in his garage gym. I'm into fitness too, so it seemed like a good way to make a new friend. But every time he asked, something in my gut told me not to go. There was always a strange vibe around Greg, something that made my skin crawl. He was too insistent, too friendly. And that smile, there was something unsettling behind it. I brushed it off as paranoia. He'd ask again, casually, each time we ran into each other. He seemed like a good guy. Why not give it a shot? One evening, after weeks of dodging his invitations, I finally gave in. I figured I'd go over for a bit, lift some weights, and be done with it. I wish I'd never stepped foot in that house. The moment I crossed his threshold, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet, too pristine, like no one really lived there. He led me down to the basement where he had a home gym set up. It was dimly lit, with weights stacked neatly in the corner and a workout bench in the middle of the room. But there was something else down there, something darker, hidden in the shadows. As we started lifting, Greg began talking about his life, how he had always been a lone wolf, how he didn't fit in anywhere. The conversation took a strange turn when he started asking personal questions, probing into my life in ways that felt invasive. I tried to change the subject, but he wasn't letting up. Then, out of nowhere, he attacked. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. 1 minute I was setting down a dumbbell, and the next he was on me, pinning me down with his massive weight. I struggled, but he was too strong. He locked me in shackles that were already bolted to the wall, hidden behind the workout gear. That's when I realized this was planned. He had set me up from the very beginning. The basement wasn't just a gym, it was a prison. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw them. 2 other guys, athletic and around my age, chained and gagged in the far corner. They were built like me, muscular, 25 to 30 years old. It was clear this wasn't a coincidence. Greg had a type, a standard, and we fit perfectly into it. He was feeding a sick demand. His victims were not chosen at random. We were all picked for a reason. Athletic guys, but none as big as him. I realized with a cold wave of dread that Greg was selling our pain. He was streaming it live on the deep web for people willing to pay to see us suffer. For days, maybe weeks, possible months, I lost track of time. He kept us down there, bound and helpless. The torture was relentless. The worst part wasn't just sexual assaults, beatings, or the psychological games he played. It was the sick requests from faceless strangers. Greg would bring his laptop down, and each session was worse than the last. People would pay to watch us bleed, suffer, and beg for mercy. He cut fingers, used electroshocks, toys, and at times the pain was unbearable. But the real horror came when someone paid enough for him to dismember a victim. I can't even put into words the sounds, the sight of someone losing a hand, an arm, a foot, piece by piece. And the blood, the smell of it still haunts me. No matter how much I scrub, I still feel it on my skin, in my nose. One night, after a particularly brutal session, I saw my chance. Greg had become careless, leaving the keys to the shackles within my reach. My hands were raw from trying to break free, but adrenaline surged through me as I grabbed the keys and quietly unlocked my chains. I freed the other 2 guys, but one of them, too weak from the torture, begged me to leave him. He knew he wouldn't make it. With a heavy heart, I left him there, promising to send help. The other guy and I crept up the stairs, our hearts pounding. Just as we reached the front door, Greg appeared at the top of the stairs, knife in hand, his eyes wild. He lunged at us, and we barely managed to push him aside. The other guy made it out, but Greg caught me by the leg, dragging me back into the house. In that moment, I thought it was over for me. But then something snapped. I grabbed a heavy dumbbell and swung it at his head with every ounce of strength I had. He collapsed, and I didn't wait to see if he was dead or unconscious. I just ran. I escaped that house, but the horrors of that basement will never leave me. Greg disappeared without a trace. By the time the authorities arrived, there was no evidence, no bodies, no shackles, nothing. The basement was spotless, as if nothing had ever happened. But I know the truth. I'll never forget the faces of the other victims, the sound of their screams, the smell of the blood. Even though I made it out alive, I'm still trapped in that basement. The nightmares will never stop. I'll always hear the screams. I'll always feel the weight of the blood on my hands, and the horrors that followed me out of that house will never leave me.
The Table for the Damned. What I'm about to tell you is something I still can't fully process, and maybe I never will. My name is Lucy, and I grew up in a small town in Missouri. But this past year, I moved to Chicago to start university. Everything about this city felt overwhelming. Fast-paced, crowded, and loud. I've always loved Halloween, though. It's been my favorite holiday since I was a kid. A time when the spooky becomes fun. Little did I know how horrifying things would get this year. Being new in a big city, making friends wasn't easy. People already had their groups, and I just felt like an outsider. That is, until Claudia showed up. She had this mysterious charm with her long, dark hair and intense green eyes. She seemed kind, though distant, like she always had something else on her mind. Still, when she invited me to her family's Halloween dinner party, I was excited. I had heard rumors about her before, strange stories, but I dismissed them as jealous gossip. The house was far out of the city, isolated in a way that felt almost intentional. I wasn't used to seeing such a place, an old Victorian mansion, enormous and intimidating, yet beautiful in its design. The moment I saw it, I felt uneasy. The walls stood tall and looming, painted a deep charcoal that blended with the darkening sky. It was impeccably maintained, pristine even, but there was something almost too perfect about it, like it was frozen in time. Claudia's family was rich, very rich. You could tell by the way everything in that house screamed wealth and status. The furniture was luxurious, the floors so polished you could see your reflection in them, and the chandeliers sparkled as though they were dripping with diamonds. The people themselves were just as flawless, dressed in expensive clothes, their manners so polished and neat it felt like I was sitting among royalty. They greeted me with warm smiles and impeccable politeness, and yet something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. It was the little things, how their smiles never reached their eyes, how Claudia's father, Arthur, watched me too closely, and how they all seemed a little too eager for dinner. "This is an annual tradition of ours," Claudia said with a soft smile. "We always have a Halloween feast, and it's also a family tradition to invite one friend." Her eyes gleamed as she looked at me, and I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. I didn't think much of it at the time. How could I? It was all so perfect, or so it seemed. As dinner was served, the smell hit me first. Rich, savory, but with a strange metallic undertone. My stomach churned. The plate set in front of me looked like something out of a gourmet restaurant. Perfectly cooked meat, roasted vegetables, the works. But when I took my first bite, my blood ran cold. It tasted wrong. I pushed my plate away, feeling nauseous. That's when Claudia leaned over, her voice barely a whisper. "It's a family recipe," she said, her eyes gleaming with something sinister. "We only make it once a year. On Halloween." I glanced around the table. Everyone else was eating eagerly, too eagerly. The sound of knives cutting into flesh echoed in the eerie silence. It was then I realized the rumors weren't just rumors. I looked at Claudia's parents, their smiles stretched too wide as they chewed. Their eyes locked on me. And then I saw it, the missing piece. I knew what I was eating. My heart pounded as panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't just any meat. It was human. "Don't mind us, dear," Claudia's father Arthur said, leaning closer with a grin that made my skin crawl. "Oh dear, no. You must call us by our names, Alice and Arthur. Titles are for the common folk." His voice was thick with a twisted charm. "Quite right, dear," her mother, Alice, chimed in, her eyes glinting with an unsettling joy. "Just think of us as family. We wouldn't want any formality at such a special occasion." I dropped my fork, shaking, my mind racing. I had to leave. I had to get out of there. But as I tried to stand, Claudia grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. "You're not going anywhere, Lucy," she whispered, her smile widening, revealing sharp, gleaming teeth. The rest of the family stopped eating, their eyes locking on me. I felt trapped, suffocated. They weren't just eating any human meat, they were eating him, the friend they invited last year. "Such a delicate palate," Arthur said, leaning in with a smile that made my skin crawl. "You simply must try it. The flavors are exquisite. Wouldn't you agree, dear?" He glanced at Alice, who smiled sweetly, her eyes glinting in the candlelight. "Oh, yes, there's nothing like it," she chimed in, her British accent lilting strangely. "Each year we prepare it with such love. It's truly an experience, dear." Then, the twin brothers, Edgar and Albert, leaned in, their faces mirroring each other in a disturbingly identical way. "It's better than anything you've had, isn't it?" Edgar asked, his voice dripping with enthusiasm, like a taste of pure terror. "Or a taste of your worst nightmares," Albert added, giggling softly, his eyes wide with glee. Time felt warped as I ran, each moment stretching painfully long. I could hear the chilling sounds of Claudia and her family feasting behind me, the wet squelch of knives slicing through flesh, their laughter ringing out like a twisted melody. They took their time, savoring each bite, as if they relished the anticipation of my fear. Panic surged through me as I bolted from the table, desperate to escape. Every door I tried was locked. Every corridor seemed to lead me deeper into the belly of that monstrous place. It felt like a never-ending nightmare, with their footsteps echoing behind me, slow and deliberate, as if they were enjoying the chase. Then suddenly, a loud bang shattered the air, making my heart leap. The police had arrived, their presence like a sliver of hope piercing through my terror. They shouted as they burst into the house, their voices reverberating through the hallways. "We have a warrant to inspect the Hargrove house due to suspected involvement in several disappearances." Their commands echoed ominously, but for me, it was too late. Claudia and her family had already started their gruesome work on me. They had taken pieces of me, fingers, part of my arm, each slice a testament to their insatiable hunger. I was barely conscious when the police finally burst into the dining room, the horror they found forever etched in their minds. The doctors say I'm lucky to be alive, but I don't feel lucky. I feel broken. I'll never be whole again, not physically, not mentally. And every Halloween, I relive that night. The smell, the taste, the sound of knives cutting into flesh. I'll never escape it. The nightmare follows me, and it always will.
The Halloween Clown. I'm not going to tell you my real name, and I'm changing the names of everyone involved to protect their identities, mine included. The police have their version of what happened that night, but I need someone to know the truth, even if it sounds unbelievable. This all started with a Halloween party last year. My friend, let's call her Rachel, was known for her over-the-top parties, and this one was no exception. She went all out. Bloody handprints on the windows, fake cobwebs, eerie music. The whole place looked like a scene from a horror movie. But the thing that really had everyone excited and made me uneasy was the entertainment Rachel had arranged. She'd hired a clown. Not just any clown, though. She kept telling us this one was special, that we wouldn't forget him. When I pressed her on where she found this guy, Rachel just smiled and said it was a surprise. But later, after everything that happened, I found out she had hired him from the deep web. The party started off like any other. People were drinking, dancing, taking pictures in their costumes. I tried to shake off the weird feeling I had about the clown, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. But then, around 11 p.m., the lights dimmed, and Rachel announced that the entertainment had arrived. The doorbell rang and the room fell silent. Rachel opened the door, and there he was. The clown was tall, almost unnaturally so, with a gaunt face painted in exaggerated white makeup. His eyes were wide, with dark, hollow circles around them, and his smile was stretched into an eerie, toothy grin. He wore a tattered, old-fashioned clown suit, red and yellow, with oversized shoes that made a dull thud with each step. But it was the way he moved that really set everyone on edge. It wasn't playful or goofy like you'd expect from a clown. It was slow, deliberate, almost predatory. The room was silent as the clown made his way through the crowd, locking eyes with each person he passed. When he finally reached the center of the room, he stopped, his grin widening even more. He didn't speak, didn't make a sound. He just stood there, staring at us, his presence growing more unsettling by the second. Then, out of nowhere, the lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and for a few seconds, all I could hear was the sound of people shuffling, whispering nervously. When the lights flickered back on, the clown was gone. At first, everyone thought it was part of the act, a way to scare us. But then, someone screamed. I turned and saw one of the guests, a guy I'll call Mike, lying on the floor, blood pooling around his head. He was dead, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle. Panic erupted. People started running for the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it had been locked from the outside. The clown reappeared, this time standing by the staircase, just watching us. His grin was gone, replaced by a look of cold, calculated malice. One by one, he picked us off. It was like a game to him. A twisted, sick game. And there was nothing we could do to stop it. Rachel was the last to go. She tried to reason with him, screaming that this wasn't part of the deal, but the clown just laughed. A high-pitched, maniacal sound that still haunts me. Then he snapped her neck, just like he had done with the others. And then he was gone. Just like that. The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, the clown had vanished. The front door was wide open, and I was the only one left standing. When the police arrived, they didn't believe a word I said. They found traces of a sedative in everyone's drinks, except mine. They accused me of drugging the guests, of going on a killing spree. They said the clown never existed, that he was just a figment of my imagination, a scapegoat I'd created to avoid taking responsibility for what I'd done. But I know what I saw. I know that clown was real. He was something far worse than anything I could have ever imagined. Something that came from a place no one should ever go. So if you ever think about hiring someone from the deep web, don't. Because you might end up bringing something into your life that you can never escape.